Hello, survivors. Thank you for taking the time to listen to the story. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe to our channel. We appreciate it, and thank you in advance. Please leave the name of the city you're listening from in the comment section below. It helps us see our reach in the community. Let's start the story. Listen, I know what you're thinking. Another Vegas story, another guy who thought he was smarter than the house. But this isn't about winning or losing at the tables. This is about the day I learned that sometimes the biggest gamble is just staying alive. My name's Tony Marino, and 3 days ago I was the kind of fool who thought money could buy him out of anything. I'd been living in that vault for 72 hours, surrounded by more cash than most people see in a lifetime, and it was worth exactly nothing. The explosion that freed me wasn't salvation. It was just trading one nightmare for another. The blast hit like thunder in a tin can. I'd been dozing against a stack of hundreds when the whole vault shook, dust raining from the ceiling, my ears ringing so hard I thought my eardrums had burst. The massive steel door, the one that had kept me prisoner for 3 days, buckled inward with a sound like the world breaking apart. Light poured through the twisted metal, harsh and white, making me squint after so long in darkness. My legs had gone numb from sitting, and when I tried to stand, I nearly collapsed. The air tasted of cordite and something else, something sweet and rotten that made my stomach clench. Holy hell, there's someone in here. The voice cut through the ringing in my ears. I blinked against the light, trying to focus. Shapes moved beyond the ruined door. Men in tactical gear, faces covered by masks and goggles. Military maybe, or cops. For a moment, hope flared in my chest. "Help!" I croaked, my voice raw from 3 days of barely speaking. "I've been trapped. Look at all this cash." Another voice. Rougher. Boss was right. This place is loaded. They weren't here to rescue me. They were here for the same reason I'd been. The money. 4 of them entered the vault, stepping over chunks of twisted steel. Their gear was expensive but mismatched. Tactical vests over civilian clothes. Assault rifles that looked military but lacked any unit markings. Mercenaries, not soldiers. The leader pulled off his mask, revealing a weathered face with gray stubble and cold eyes. He looked at me like I was a piece of furniture he hadn't expected to find. "You work here?" he asked. I shook my head, still trying to get my legs under me. I stopped. Admitting I'd been robbing the place didn't seem wise. I got trapped when everything went crazy. Everything went crazy is right. This from a younger guy, Latino, with nervous energy that made him keep checking over his shoulder. "Rico, we need to move. Those things are still wandering around out there." Things. The word hit me like ice water. Through the vault's destroyed entrance, I could hear it now. Sounds I'd been hearing faintly for days but had convinced myself were my imagination. Moaning, shuffling, the wet slap of bare feet on marble. The leader, Rico, studied me for a moment longer. "You know this city?" "Born and raised." It was true. I'd spent 38 years in Vegas, most of them in casinos. "Good, you're coming with us." Rico gestured to his men. "Load up everything you can carry. Bills, gold, anything valuable." "Wait, what's happening out there?" I asked, but they were already moving, stuffing duffel bags with stacks of cash. The nervous one, Carlos I heard Rico call him, kept glancing toward the vault entrance. "You don't know?" Carlos laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Man, you've been in here for 3 days? The whole city's gone to hell. Dead people walking around biting folks. Military pulled out yesterday." My knees nearly gave out. "Dead people? Focus up, Marino." Rico's voice was sharp. He'd somehow learned my name while I wasn't paying attention. "We've got work to do. You want to get out of this city alive, you stick with us and do what we say." I wanted to ask more questions, but the sounds from outside were getting closer, more distinct. And underneath the moaning, I could hear something else. The electronic melody of slot machines still running, their cheerful jingles creating a surreal soundtrack to whatever nightmare waited beyond the vault. Rico handed me a pistol. "You know how to use this?" "I've been to the range a few times." My hands shook as I took it. The metal was cold and heavier than I'd expected. Safety's off, point and shoot, aim for the head. He shouldered a bag stuffed with cash. All right, people, let's see what's left of the Bellagio. We moved toward the vault entrance, and I got my first real look at what had become of the casino where I'd spent so many nights chasing luck. The destruction was total, but in the strangest way possible. The slot machines were still running, their screens flashing animations of spinning reels and jackpot celebrations. The overhead lights still worked, casting everything in that familiar casino glow. But the carpet was dark with stains I didn't want to identify, and scattered among the overturned chairs and abandoned drinks were shapes that made my throat close up. Bodies, but not just bodies. They were moving. A woman in a cocktail dress dragged herself across the casino floor, leaving a dark smear behind her. Half her face was gone, torn away to reveal yellow teeth and gray gums. But she kept crawling toward. Her remaining eye was clouded white, seeing nothing but somehow tracking our movement. "Don't shoot unless you have to," Rico whispered. "Sound draws them." A man in a dealer's uniform stood swaying near the blackjack tables, his head tilted at an impossible angle, neck clearly broken. His hands hung limp at his sides, but his legs kept taking small, stuttering steps that carried him in slow circles around the table. When he heard us, his head snapped up with a wet crack, and he began shambling in our direction. More of them emerged from behind slot machines and overturned tables, a security guard with his throat torn out, an elderly woman still clutching a plastic cup full of quarters, a young man in a Lakers jersey, most of his chest cavity visible through tears in the fabric. They moved without coordination, each following its own simple drive toward the sound and smell of living flesh. No intelligence in their movements, just primitive hunger guiding dead muscles. This way, Rico led us toward what used to be the main floor, weaving between the infected. The bags of money slowed us down, but none of his men suggested leaving them behind. The fourth member of their group, a woman named Beth with short black hair and scars on her hands, moved with practiced silence. She gestured for us to stop as a group of infected wandered past, following some sound only they could hear. "They can't see worth a damn," she whispered. "But they hear everything, and the smell. They track that too." We crept forward, the casino's ambient noise covering our footsteps. It was grotesque how normal everything looked except for the walking corpses. The fountains still bubbled, the air conditioning still hummed, the slot machines still played their endless electronic symphonies. Like the building itself didn't know the world had ended. A jackpot alarm started blaring from somewhere across the floor, probably triggered by coins scattered from an abandoned machine. The sound cut through the air like a siren, and every infected head in the casino turned toward it. They began shuffling in that direction, their broken gates carrying them past us like we were invisible. "Lucky break," Carlos muttered, but our luck didn't last. As we reached the main exit, a new sound joined the casino's chorus, footsteps running on pavement outside. Getting closer, human footsteps. "Infected don't run," Rico said, checking his rifle. "Someone else is out there." Through the glass doors I could see the strip stretching away into the distance, and my heart sank. It looked like a war zone. Cars abandoned in the middle of the road, some still running with their doors hanging open. Smoke rose from a dozen different fires, and the famous neon signs flickered erratically, some dark, others blazing with advertisements for shows that would never play again. And scattered across it all, moving with that same hunger I'd seen in the casino, were hundreds of them. They wandered the streets like broken automatons, following invisible trails of scent and sound. Their ruined faces turned skyward, as if searching for prey that wasn't there. "How are we supposed to get through that?" I asked. Rico smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Very carefully, Marino. Very carefully." The runner outside passed by without stopping, someone else trying to survive in this nightmare. As his footsteps faded, I realized I was committed now. Whatever these mercenaries were planning, whatever job they were really here to do, I was part of it whether I wanted to be or not. The money in their bags felt like an anchor around our necks, worthless weight in a world where the only currency that mattered was staying alive until tomorrow. Rico checked his watch. Daylight's burning. Time to see what Vegas looks like when the house always wins. The strip in daylight looked like the world's most expensive graveyard. We'd been moving for 2 hours, and every step reminded me why I'd spent my life indoors. The October sun beat down mercilessly, turning the asphalt into a griddle that cooked the smell of death into the air. Sweet rot mixed with gasoline fumes and something chemical, maybe from all the abandoned cars still running, their engines slowly cooking themselves to death. Rico had us moving in single file, hugging the shadows of buildings whenever possible. The fourth member of their crew had finally shown himself. Vince, a mountain of a man with arms like tree trunks and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. He brought up the rear, carrying 2 duffel bags like they weighed nothing. The heat was brutal. My shirt stuck to my back with sweat that had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with the constant terror of being hunted. Every shadow could hide one of those things. Every sound made my finger twitch toward the pistol Rico had given me. "Talk to me, Marino," Rico said quietly as we crouched behind an overturned taxi. "What's the fastest route to the Venetian from here?" I peered around the cab's twisted bumper. We were maybe 6 blocks from the Bellagio, and the Venetian felt like it might as well be on the moon. Between us and there, the strip crawled with infected. They wandered aimlessly, drawn by sounds I couldn't identify. A car alarm somewhere to the north, maybe, or the electronic whine of damaged neon signs. "Straight shot up Las Vegas Boulevard," I said. "But there's no cover once we hit the main stretch. What about side streets? They all connect back to the strip eventually, and most of the alleys between casinos are narrow, if we get cornered." I didn't need to finish. Beth was studying the infected through a small pair of binoculars. "They're not coordinating," she murmured. "Look at them, each one following its own path." She was right. A group of maybe 15 infected had gathered near the broken fountain in front of Caesar's palace, but they weren't a pack. They bumped into each other without reaction, each focused on its own invisible trail. When one shambled away, the others didn't follow unless they individually picked up the same scent or sound. "Pure instinct," Carlos said. "Like animals, but broken ones." A woman in a torn wedding dress dragged one leg behind her, the white fabric stained brown and red. She walked straight into a light pole, bounced off, and kept walking in the same direction as if nothing had happened. No learning, no adaptation, just hunger. Near the Caesar's entrance, a man in a business suit stood swaying, his briefcase still clutched in one hand, despite the fact that his other arm had been torn off at the shoulder. He kept trying to walk forward, but his feet were tangled in his own intestines. Each step pulled the coiled mass tighter around his ankles, sending him stumbling. But he never looked down, never tried to free himself, just kept walking into the obstruction over and over. "Guzman's going to want proof we're making progress," Rico said, checking his radio. Static answered him. "Comms are still down, we stick to the plan." That was the first time I'd heard the name. Guzman. From the way Rico said it, this wasn't just some random job. Whoever this guy was, he had serious pull. "Who's Guzman?" I asked. Rico gave me a look that could have frozen vodka. "Need to know, Marino, and you don't need to know." But Carlos was less careful. Rich guy with a compound out in the desert, paying top dollar for recovery jobs in the city. "Recovery jobs," I repeated. "You mean looting?" "I mean survival," Rico snapped. "Guzman's got food, water, generators, medical supplies. Everything you need to ride out whatever this is. In exchange, his people make runs into the city for specific items." "Specific items like what?" "Cash, gold, jewelry. Anything that'll still have value when this blows over." Rico shouldered his bag. "Man's building himself a kingdom out there. Smart money says he's gonna come out of this richer than he went in. And if we don't deliver?" Vince spoke for the first time since we'd left the casino, his voice like gravel in a cement mixer. "We don't get in." The implication hung in the air like smoke. Whatever was happening in Vegas, it wasn't contained here. The outside world was either gone or not taking refugees. Guzman's compound was their only ticket out. We moved again, using the maze of abandoned cars as cover. The vehicles told their own stories, doors flung open, blood on the seats, children's toys scattered on the asphalt. A minivan had crashed into a storefront, its windshield spider-webbed but intact. Through the glass, I could see a car seat still strapped in the back, a small stuffed elephant lying on the floor beside it. "Don't look too hard," Beth said, noticing my stare. "It'll mess with your head." Too late for that. I'd been seeing everything in excruciating detail since we'd left the casino. The way the infected moved with that horrible randomness. The sound their feet made on the pavement, not quite footsteps, more like meat-slapping concrete. The way the living city kept running around them, traffic lights cycling through their colors for no one, escalators in the shopping centers still carrying air. A police cruiser sat abandoned in the middle of an intersection, both front doors open, blood splattered across the windshield from the inside. The radio crackled with automated emergency broadcasts, the same message repeating endlessly. "Shelter in place. Avoid contact with infected individuals. Help is coming." Help wasn't coming. Anyone with half a brain could see that. We passed the Flamingo, its pink neon still blazing despite everything. Through the shattered windows, I could see infected wandering the casino floor, bumping into slot machines that continued their electronic songs. One sat at a blackjack table, its decomposing hands resting on the felt as if waiting for cards that would never come. "This is insane," I muttered. "Those machines are still running. The power's still on. How is any of this still working?" "Infrastructure takes time to break down," Beth said. "Give it another week and half these lights will be dark." "Assuming we live that long," Carlos added. Rico held up his hand and we stopped. Ahead of us, a crowd of infected had gathered around something near the Mirage's entrance. They pressed against each other with mindless insistence, each trying to reach whatever was at the center of their attention. "What are they after?" I asked. Beth raised her binoculars again. "Looks like someone's trapped in a car. Driver's still alive, trying to honk them away." The car horn blared repeatedly, a desperate SOS that only drew more infected to the scene. They clawed at the windows with broken fingernails, leaving bloody smears on the glass. The person inside had stopped honking. Either they'd given up or run out of battery. "We go around," Rico decided. "Not our problem." "We could help them," I said, though I wasn't sure why. 3 days ago, I wouldn't have cared about a stranger's problems. "Help them what? Get themselves killed?" Rico shook his head. "Look at that mess. You want to fight through 50 of those things for someone who's probably going to die anyway?" He was right. But it still felt wrong. I was starting to realize that survival in this new world meant making choices that would have been unthinkable before. How many people had already decided I wasn't worth saving? We took a detour through a shopping plaza, moving between stores whose security gates had been torn open. Most had been looted already, shelves stripped bare of anything useful. A sporting goods store was picked clean of weapons and camping gear. A pharmacy's windows were smashed, pill bottles scattered across the floor like confetti. In the food court, several infected sat at tables as if waiting for meals that would never come. They didn't react to our presence until we were almost past them, then slowly turned their heads to track our movement. One tried to stand but fell backward, its legs no longer strong enough to support its weight. It hit the floor with a wet thud and immediately began crawling toward us, leaving a trail of dark fluid behind. "Keep moving," Rico said. "They're slower when they're damaged, but they don't stop." We were crossing the intersection near the Mirage when we heard it, a human voice calling for help. "Please, someone!" The voice was female, coming from somewhere ahead and to our right. Rico held up his fist and we froze. The call came again, desperate and raw. "Help me, I'm trapped." "It's coming from the Treasure Island parking garage," I said. Rico considered this, weighing options I couldn't guess at. Around us, several infected had stopped their aimless wandering and were turning toward the sound, their heads tilting like dogs hearing a whistle. "We investigate," he decided. "Carefully." The parking garage was a concrete tomb, its entrance yawning like an open mouth. Our footsteps bounced off the walls as we climbed to the second level, following the voice. The smell here was worse. enclosed space concentrating the odor of death and decay. Somewhere in the darkness, I could hear water dripping steadily, each drop marking time like a countdown. "Here. I'm here." She was trapped inside a Honda Civic, windows up, doors locked. A woman in her 30s with blonde hair and terrified eyes. Around the car, 3 infected pawed at the glass with slow, persistent movements. They'd been at it for a while. Their fingernails were worn down to bloody stubs, but they kept scratching. One was a teenager in a McDonald's uniform, his name tag still reading Kevin. Half his face had been torn away, revealing broken teeth and a gray tongue that lolled from his ruined mouth. But his hands never stopped moving against the glass, following some primitive drive that death hadn't erased. "Carol," she called through the glass when she saw us. "My name's Carol. Please help me." Beth raised her rifle, but Rico stopped her. Instead, he pulled out a long knife and moved around behind the infected. One by one, he drove the blade up through the base of their skulls. They dropped without sound, whatever animating force driving them simply switching off. Carol climbed out of the car, shaking. "Thank God. I've been trapped in there since yesterday. My car wouldn't start and those things just kept coming." "You hurt?" Rico asked. She shook her head. "Hungry, thirsty, but not hurt." She looked at each of us with desperate gratitude. "I thought I was going to die in there. I watched them tear apart a family trying to get to their car. A little girl. She couldn't have been more than 6. Carlos handed her a water bottle from his pack, and she drank greedily. I watched Rico watching her, and something in his expression made my skin crawl. It wasn't relief or compassion. It was calculation. "Where were you headed?" he asked. "North. I heard on the radio there might be evacuation centers in Reno." "Radio's been playing old messages," Beth said. "Most of those centers are probably overrun by now." Carol's face fell. "Then where?" "We know a safe place," Rico said smoothly. "Secure compound outside the city. Food, water, protection. You can come with us." "Really?" Hope flickered in her eyes. "What do I have to do?" "Just stay close and do what we tell you." Something about the way he said it made my stomach tighten. I'd heard that tone before, in backroom poker games where the stakes weren't just money. It was the voice of someone who'd already decided how the game would end. "What kind of compound?" I asked. "Military?" "Private," Rico said. "Guy named Guzman built himself a fortress out in the desert. Self-sufficient. Solar power, water wells, supply stockpiles. He's taking in people who can contribute." "Contribute how?" "Security, labor, specific skills." Rico shouldered his pack. "Or by bringing valuable materials from the city." Carol looked confused. "What kind of materials?" "Whatever needs recovering," Vince said. "This isn't charity. Everyone earns their keep." There was something in the way he said it that made me think earning your keep might involve more than just manual labor. I thought about Carol, alone and desperate, and felt sick. We left the parking garage with Carol in the middle of our group. She kept thanking Rico, telling him how grateful she was, how she'd lost hope of finding anyone decent left alive. He nodded and smiled, but his eyes stayed cold. The strip opened up before us again, and I could see our destination in the distance. The Venetian's fake campanile rising above the chaos like a monument to better times. But we'd have to cross the main thoroughfare to get there, and it was crawling with infected. A bus had jackknifed across 3 lanes, its windows broken out and interior dark with blood. Infected wandered around it like sharks around a reef, drawn by some scent or sound I couldn't detect. One had gotten stuck between the bus and a concrete barrier. Its torso pinned, but its legs still churning uselessly. It had worn its shoes to tatters and ground its feet down to bone, but it kept trying to walk. "There," Vince pointed to a gap in the wandering corpses. 30-second window, maybe less. "We run hard and fast," Rico said. "If someone falls behind, they fall behind. Everyone understand?" Carol nodded eagerly. I just stared at him. In that moment, I realized these weren't rescue workers or even simple thieves. They were predators, and Carol was just another piece of cargo to deliver to their boss. "Ready?" Rico asked. We ran. The infected reacted instantly to the sound of our movement. Heads turned, and they began shambling toward us from all directions. But we had momentum and they didn't. We weaved between abandoned cars and overturned barricades, the Venetian growing larger with each step. A group of infected had been clustered around an overturned ice cream truck, drawn by its musical chimes that still played their cheerful melody. When they heard us running, they abandoned their vigil and began following. Behind us, more infected joined the pursuit. They couldn't think or plan, but they didn't need to. They just needed to keep walking until something stumbled or slowed down enough for them to catch. Carlos reached the casino entrance first. Then Beth, then Carol. I was fourth, my lungs burning from the sprint. Rico and Vince brought up the rear, turning occasionally to discourage pursuit with carefully placed shots. "Inside," Rico ordered, and we pushed through the doors into the Venetian's lobby. If the Bellagio had been surreal, the Venetian was pure nightmare. The indoor canals still flowed. Their mechanical gondoliers still sang recorded songs in Italian, but the water was choked with floating bodies. The painted sky on the ceiling looked down on a scene from hell. The fake St. Mark's Square was littered with corpses and overturned cafe tables. An infected in a gondolier's striped shirt stood waist-deep in the canal, swaying as the current pushed against him. His pole was gone, but his hand still made the motions of steering, muscle memory persisting long after the mind had died. "Jesus," Carol whispered. "Keep moving," Rico said. "We're not here for sightseeing." But I was starting to understand that we weren't here for money either. This was something else, something bigger. And Carol, poor, grateful Carol, had no idea what she'd really signed up for. The real gamble was just beginning. The Venetian's shopping mall was a maze of death dressed in Italian marble. We'd been inside for an hour, working our way through the faux Venetian streets while Rico marked locations on a hand-drawn map. Whatever Guzman wanted from this place, it wasn't just about the money we'd already collected. This felt more like reconnaissance, like we were scouting for something specific. Carol stayed close to Beth, asking quiet questions about the compound, about Guzman, about what would be expected of her when we got there. Beth's answers were evasive, but Carol seemed too grateful to notice the holes in the story. "How many people live there?" Carol asked as we ducked under the twisted remains of a bridge that had collapsed across the canal. "Enough," Beth replied. "Guzman's particular about who he takes in, useful people only. What makes someone useful?" That earned a look from Rico that shut Beth up fast. I was beginning to understand that Carol's usefulness wasn't going to be her accounting skills or her ability to grow vegetables. The shopping arcade stretched ahead of us, its vaulted ceilings echoing with the sound of our footsteps and the distant moans of infected somewhere in the maze. Store windows had been smashed, their contents scattered across the polished floors. A jewelry store's display cases were shattered, but most of the expensive pieces were still there. Diamonds and gold meant nothing when you couldn't eat them. Vince was methodically checking each store, not for money, but for something else. He'd disappear into a shop for a few minutes, then emerge shaking his head. When I asked Rico what he was looking for, I got the same need-to-know look that was becoming familiar. An infected woman in an evening gown stumbled past us, paying no attention to our presence. She'd been beautiful once, probably a showgirl or entertainer, but now half her scalp hung loose, exposing gray bone beneath. She walked toward some destination only she could sense, stepping over debris and bodies with equal indifference. We found what Vince had been searching for in an electronics store near the mall's center. The security gate had been torn off its hinges, and the store's interior was dark except for the glow of emergency lighting. But unlike the other shops, this one hadn't been completely looted. Inside, the smell was different. Less death, more ozone and melted plastic. Computer monitors lay shattered on the floor, but the back room held what Vince was after. "Bingo," Vince said, emerging with a metal briefcase and what looked like a military radio. "Communications equipment. Military grade." He set the briefcase on a counter and popped it open. Inside, nestled in foam padding, were devices I didn't recognize. Black boxes with digital displays and thick antennas. Rico smiled for the first time since I'd met him. Guzman's going to be very happy. What does he need military communications for? I asked. Same thing anyone needs communications for, Carlos said, staying in touch with his other operations. Operations plural? Carol asked, but Rico was already closing the briefcase. Guzman's got people working recovery missions in half a dozen cities, Beth explained. Phoenix, Tucson, Albuquerque, anywhere there's still something worth taking. Other operations. The picture was getting clearer, and I didn't like what I was seeing. Guzman wasn't just some rich guy hiding in the desert. He was running something bigger, coordinated, and people like Carol were just another resource to be collected and distributed. Other operations. The picture was getting clearer, and I didn't like what I was seeing. Guzman wasn't just some rich guy hiding in the desert. He was running something bigger, coordinated, and people like Carol were just another resource to be collected and distributed. We were heading back toward the main canal when the lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in a few seconds later, bathing everything in a hellish red glow. But in those seconds of darkness, we heard something that made my blood freeze. The sound of dozens of feet splashing through the canal water. They followed us in, Beth whispered. The infected had found the entrance we'd used, drawn by our scent or the sound of our voices. Now they were spreading through the mall like a plague, their shambling gait creating a constant splash and scrape that seemed to come from everywhere at once. How many? Rico asked. Too many, Vince said, checking his rifle. And more coming. Carol grabbed my arm. What do we do? Before I could answer, the first infected appeared at the far end of the shopping arcade. It was a security guard, his uniform torn and bloody, his radio still crackling with static on his belt. He saw us and began walking in our direction with that horrible sense of purpose that wasn't quite human anymore. Behind him came more. A maintenance worker dragging a mop bucket that he no longer remembered how to use. A tourist in a Hawaiian shirt with a camera still hanging around his neck. An elderly woman clutching a slot machine cup filled with quarters that spilled behind her as she walked. Back exit, Rico said. Now, we retreated deeper into the mall, but the infected were coming from that direction too. They moved without coordination, each following its own path, but the result was the same. We were being surrounded. Up, Beth said, pointing to a service ladder that led to a maintenance level above the shops. We go up. The ladder was narrow and rusted, barely wide enough for one person. Carol went first, then Beth, then me. Below us, Rico, Carlos, and Vince formed a defensive line as the infected closed in. The first shots were deafening in the enclosed space. Rico's rifle barked 3 times, dropping the security guard and 2 others. But the sound drew more infected from throughout the mall, their moans creating a chorus that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Move faster! Carlos shouted, firing into the crowd. A woman in a cocktail dress spun around and fell, but the man beside her kept walking, stepping on her body without breaking stride. I reached the maintenance level and helped Carol up. The space was cramped and dark, filled with pipes and electrical conduits, but it was defensible, only one way up or down. Beth came next, then Rico, both of them breathing hard. Below us, Carlos and Vince kept firing, the muzzle flashes strobing through the red emergency light. Carlos, move! Rico shouted. Carlos started up the ladder, but an infected in a chef's outfit grabbed his leg. He kicked free but lost his balance and fell back into the crowd. His scream was cut short by the wet sound of teeth finding flesh. Carlos! Vince roared, emptying his magazine into the mass of infected below. But it was too late. Carlos was down, and they were feeding. Vince started up the ladder, but there were too many of them now. Hands reached for him from all directions, grabbing at his clothes and equipment. He fought them off with the rifle butt, crushing skulls and breaking bones. But they kept coming. Leave him, Rico said. But Vince was already falling. I watched it happen through the grating, Vince disappearing under a wave of infected, his final shot going wide and sparking off the ceiling. The sound of the feeding was worse than their moans. We have to help them, Carol said, but Rico was already pulling the ladder up. They're gone, he said. We stay here, we're gone too. The maintenance level had emergency exits that led to the roof. We crawled through the narrow passages, Carol sobbing quietly behind me until we reached a ladder that led up to fresh air and daylight. The roof of the Venetian stretched out before us like a concrete desert. Air conditioning units and satellite dishes created a landscape of metal and wire. In the distance, I could see the strip stretching away toward the horizon, smoke rising from a dozen different fires. "Now what?" I asked. Rico was checking his remaining ammunition. "Now we complete the mission." "The mission!" "Carlos and Vince are dead. We barely got out of there alive. And we got what we came for." He tapped the briefcase. "Guzman's going to be very pleased." Carol was staring out at the devastated city. "How are we going to get out of here? Those things are everywhere." "There's a helipad on the roof of the palazzo," Rico said, "connected to this building by a walkway. If we're lucky, there might still be a helicopter there. And if we're not lucky, then we find another way." Rico shouldered his pack. "Move out." The walkway between the buildings was a glass-enclosed bridge 40 feet above the street. Through the windows, I could see infected wandering the sidewalks below, drawn by sounds I couldn't identify. Some had gathered around a crashed ambulance, its siren still wailing weakly. The view from up here showed the true scope of the devastation. Entire blocks were dark, their power grids failed. Smoke columns rose from countless fires that would burn until they ran out of fuel. In the distance, I could see the airport, its runways cluttered with abandoned planes. Halfway across the bridge, Carol stopped walking. "I can't do this," she said. "I can't keep running. I'm tired, I'm scared, and I don't understand what's happening." "You don't have to understand," Rico said. "You just have to keep moving." "Why are you really helping me?" she asked. "What do you want from me?" Rico and Beth exchanged a look that made my stomach turn. I'd been dreading this moment, hoping it wouldn't come, but Carol was too smart to stay fooled forever. "Guzman needs people," Rico said carefully. "Specific types of people. Young, healthy, attractive. For what? Entertainment, companionship, whatever he decides." The words hung in the air like poison gas. Carol's face went white as the implications sank in. "You're not taking me to safety," she whispered. "You're taking me to be a slave. You'll be fed, protected, housed. That's more than most people have right now." "I won't do it." Carol backed away from them. "I'd rather die than—" "That can be arranged," Beth said, her hand moving to her sidearm. And that's when I made the biggest gamble of my life. "No," I said, stepping between Beth and Carol. "This isn't happening." Rico smiled that cold smile. "Getting attached, Marino? Bad habit in this business. This isn't business. This is slavery. This is survival. The world's ended, in case you hadn't noticed. Old rules don't apply anymore. Some rules always apply." I still had the pistol Rico had given me. It was in my hand before I consciously decided to draw it. Beth had her gun out too, but she was looking at Rico for orders. "You going to shoot us, Marino?" Rico asked. "Over some woman you met an hour ago?" "If I have to." The irony wasn't lost on me. 3 days ago, I'd been trying to rob this very casino. Now I was risking my life to save someone I barely knew. Maybe getting trapped in that vault had changed me more than I'd realized. "Stand down, Marino," Rico said. "Walk away. There's still room for you at the compound." "What about Carol?" "Carol's cargo, nothing more." That's when I shot him. The bullet caught Rico in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his rifle clattering across the walkway. Beth raised her weapon, but I was already moving, tackling her before she could fire. We went down hard, her gun sliding away across the glass floor. "Run!" I shouted to Carol. "The other end of the walkway!" Carol didn't need to be told twice. She sprinted toward the palazzo while Beth and I fought for control of her weapon. She was stronger than she looked, and trained, but I had desperation on my side. Rico was trying to reach his rifle with his good arm. I broke free from Beth and dove for the weapon, but she grabbed my ankle and pulled me back. Her fingernails raked across my face as I twisted away. The gunshot was deafening. For a moment, I thought I'd been hit. Then I saw Beth collapse, blood spreading across her chest. Carol stood at the end of the walkway, Beth's pistol smoking in her hands. I was a police officer, she said quietly. Before all this. Rico was on his knees, clutching his wounded shoulder. You have no idea what you've done, he gasped. Guzman will send others. He'll find you. Then we better get moving, I said. The palazzo's roof was empty except for a maintenance shed and some communications equipment. No helicopter, no easy way out. But there was a fire escape that led down to the parking garage. What about the equipment? Carol asked, nodding toward the communications gear. I looked back at Rico, who was still on his knees, blood seeping through his fingers. How do we contact the evacuation centers, the real ones? He laughed bitterly. You think there are real ones? Kid, the government's gone, military's gone, it's every man for himself now. The communications equipment was military surplus, but it was functional. Carol, being an ex-cop, knew enough about radio operations to get it working. We spent a few minutes scanning frequencies, listening to static and automated distress calls. Then we found something. Henderson checkpoint is secure and accepting refugees. Food and medical supplies available. Carol and I looked at each other. Henderson was maybe 20 miles southeast of Vegas. It might as well have been on the moon, but it was something. Where do we go now? Carol asked as we started down the metal stairs. Away from here, north like you planned. Maybe those evacuation centers are still operating. And if they're not, then we keep moving until we find somewhere safe. It took us 2 hours to work our way through the parking garage and out to the street. The infected were everywhere, but they moved with that same mindless persistence that made them predictable. We avoided the large groups and dealt with the stragglers quietly. By evening, we'd reached the edge of the city. The desert stretched out before us, empty and hostile, but free of the walking dead. Behind us, Vegas burned under a sky the color of old blood. We'd managed to find a working vehicle in the parking garage, an old pickup truck with half a tank of gas and keys still in the ignition. The drive out of the city had been a nightmare of detours and backtracking, but we'd made it. Now, parked on a hill overlooking the valley, we could see the full extent of what had happened to Vegas. The Strip was a chain of dying lights, its famous neon signs flickering erratically as power grids failed. Fires burned unchecked throughout the city. What made you do it? Carol asked as we walked. Why did you risk everything for me? I thought about that for a long time before answering. I spent my whole life taking from people. Maybe it was time to give something back. We walked through the night, following the highway north toward an uncertain future. The money in Rico's bag was worthless now, but somehow that felt right. The only currency that mattered anymore was the choice to help someone when you could just as easily walk away. The house always wins, they say, but sometimes, if you're very lucky and very brave, you can change the game entirely. 3 days ago, I'd been a selfish man who thought money could solve any problem. Tonight, I was something different. I wasn't sure what exactly, but it felt like the kind of transformation that was worth whatever came next. The desert was cold and unforgiving, but it was honest in a way Vegas never was. And for the first time in my life, I was honest too. The real gamble had never been about the cards or the dice or the spinning wheel. It had always been about choosing what kind of person you wanted to be when everything else was stripped away. I'd finally made the right bet.